Move for Mayor.
Chair recognizes Representative Laubenberg in opposition to the amendment.
Again, members, this bill has been very carefully written, and I move to table. The admitting privileges are integral to the quality of care and the continuity of care. It ensures a higher quality of care for the patient. Right now, abortion doctors can get admitting privileges. Two-thirds of them already have that.
Why don't I ask you questions when she
We have heard from a doctor who sits on the admitting board of a local hospital. Through that,
That's what I say here, though.
that particular hospital does not do abortions, but they give admitting privileges to abortion doctors.
Mr. King, for what purpose?
Well, I was originally wanting to ask Ms. Howard some questions. I guess she'll be back up there to
Close on her
close.
amendment. She will return to
Does
close
she
on her
intend to
amendment.
take questions?
The gentlelady yields. Does the gentlelady yield? The gentlelady yield. Thank you. I just have one question, Representative Laubenberg. I wanted to know what the reason was for changing, since your bill is requiring that abortion clinics now be regulated when it comes in the correct timing, but be regulated as an ambulatory surgical center. Why did you change this portion of what's currently required of an ambulatory surgical center?
No, change. I'm sorry. Can you clarify that change?
Yeah.
Change it. Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Your bill is requiring abortion clinics to be regulated as ambulatory surgical centers. Is that correct?
Yes.
And yet you changed one of the regulations to say that rather than following what currently exists for ambulatory surgical centers in terms of transfer agreements and admitting privileges, you changed that to only admitting privileges.
I gotcha. I'm sorry. Yes.
And I'm asking why.
Because again, it's dealing with a very different type of procedure. An abortion is much different than getting your tonsils out, or
In what sense is it different?
Well, and it's the only procedure. Well, it's the only procedure that, when it is done, there is a life that is taken. You can have complications in that procedure, and so the admitting procedures are there to help deal with some of those complications.
So are there more medical complications? Are you suggesting there's more medical complications with abortions and with some of these other procedures that are done in ambulatory surgical centers?
I'm not advised of that.
So if you're not advised of that, then why would you require this different level of admitting privileges?
Because the potential for complications, for more severe complications,
and what
are there.
potential is there that exists for that procedure that doesn't exist for other procedures?
Because you are dealing with two lives at this point.
So this is not about a medical procedure, it's because you're talking about two lives instead of one.
Two lives that are going through a medical procedure, one of which is not going to survive.
Well, let me ask you this, Representative Laubenberg. If you were in an ASC and you were pregnant and you were in there to have a procedure to help you continue your pregnancy, you'd be dealing with two lives. Currently, that requires the current ASC admitting and transfer privileges. What makes that different?
Because you're trying to continue the life and not abort the life.
But what does that have to do with requiring different admitting privileges?
Because of the abortion is a much more invasive.
In what way?
That the life of the child is going to end.
But that's the purpose of having a termination and an abortion.
That's
you're
correct.
Going in and you're pregnant and you're wanting to continue your pregnancy, and you're having a procedure to do that, you're still involving an additional life. Why would you think that there'd be fewer complications with trying to continue an additional life than terminating one?
When you are talking about continuing the life, what
Talking about if you're trying to
I'm not understanding. Yeah, and please forgive me because I'm really not understanding. I'm not following your logic.
Let me try to say it differently then.
Yeah.
You're holding an abortion procedure to a different standard because you say it's a unique procedure that has more complications associated with it.
That would be true.
Is that correct?
Yes.
And I don't know what you're basing that on, but if indeed you're talking about, if we can use the example of a nut.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. If we can use the example of a woman who is pregnant, who has a complication and is in for a procedure in an ASC to continue that pregnancy, to help that pregnancy continue and have a successful delivery. Why are you thinking that that would require less admitting privileges than having an abortion?
Representative Howard, 2/3 of the doctors already have admitting privileges with hospitals, and so basically you're just trying to make sure that the physician is a member of the community, not hop-skipping around.
Well, do you know what's required? Do you know what's required by hospitals to gain admitting privileges and to have them renewed?
Each hospital has their own set of standards.
Did you know that most of the hospitals require that you do a certain number of the procedures that you are going to be asking to have admitting privileges for? Did you understand that?
I'm sorry, say it again, please.
One of the ways that hospitals grant privileges is to require a certain number of procedures be performed in their facility. This is a business model. You know,
it would depend on the hospital.
I'm sorry?
It would depend on the hospital.
But that is what the hospitals do. If you talk to the Texas Hospital Association, they will tell you that that's how hospitals set up admitting procedures, privileges. It's based, one of the criteria is the number of procedures that you perform in their facility because this is a business arrangement. Did you know that?
We heard testimony from a physician who sits on the admitting board, who sat on the admitting board for his hospital, local hospital here in Austin.
Right.
And that particular hospital did not perform abortions, but they gave admitting privileges to abortion doctors.
Do you know what's required to renew, though? You may be able to get your admitting privileges initially. But to renew, you have to have done a certain number of procedures in that period of time. Did you know that?
He indicated that that was not prohibiting any physician who performed abortions from continuing their admitting privileges at that hospital.
I don't remember. I heard his testimony. I don't remember that he said that specifically. Perhaps he did. I'll go back and listen to it. But the fact is that you are required to perform a certain number of procedures. If you are a physician who is practicing in a clinic where you are providing abortions, and that is your full-time position, the only time you would need to be in the hospital would be for complications such as for hemorrhaging, hysterectomy, that sort of thing. According to the information I have from the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the rate of hysterectomy and complication with abortion is about 1 in 100,000. Now, if you're required to perform several procedures to be able to renew your privileges at the hospital, you can't mathematically get there with that number. The complications are so rare. You do not have the opportunity to practice in that hospital and do the procedures that get you your license renewed. Are you aware of that?
I think the information you're referring to is also talking about in the early stages, but the farther along that you go in the term to do the abortion, the complications actually do increase. But again, each hospital has their own set of standards. And so, if the physician is a member of the community, then he would have that relationship with the
So,
hospital.
regardless of whatever we're saying here, the fact is that you believe...
Representative Strickland raises a point of order. The gentlelady's time has expired. The point of order is well taken and sustained.
I move the table.
Chair recognizes Representative Howard to close.
Okay, thank you, Madam Speaker. Members, I do want to just close with a couple of statements and then I'll yield. Just to say that this bill, as it's written, overreaches and provides an undue burden on women. It is not narrowly tailored, and the amendment that I have proposed would more narrowly tailor this bill, which actually would help it to survive constitutional challenge. So that's part of what this is about. But the bottom line is that we, through this legislation, if it is passed, are suggesting that abortion clinics should function as ambulatory surgical centers, and yet we're changing what currently exists in terms of transfer and admitting privileges in ambulatory surgical centers to a more stringent requirement just for those ambulatory surgical centers that provide abortions, unnecessarily so, and I yield.
Mr. Speaker, will the gentlelady yield?
Does the lady yield?
Yes, I do.
The gentlelady yields.
Thank you. Ms. Howard, I understand your argument on the standards issue, but would you agree with me that the bill will go into effect 91 days after third reading?
Okay.
And that's the point at which the requirement for admitting would go into place.
Okay.
The requirement for all the facilities to be ASC at an ASC level doesn't go into effect until September of 14.
Okay.
And so if I understand correct, what your amendment would do would, and I understand your argument where you're saying, well, is it right to have admitting privileges and the ambulatory requirements? But for the first almost year of this bill, those abortion clinics will still be operating as a lightly regulated abortion clinic. Wouldn't you agree with me that those admitting privileges are important, at least during that gap period?
I don't think it's written that way, is it?
It is written that way. The clinics will not be required to upgrade to ASCs until January 14.
Well,
your amendment would go into effect in 91
okay,
days.
Whatever. That's something I'd be willing to look at changing, Representative King. The point
Which is
here
one point
is that when it does go into effect, it is the language does require that the ASCs that perform abortions have a more stringent requirement for admitting procedures.
Well, and let's talk about that too, because I wanted to ask you a couple questions about that section as well.
Okay.
To that point. You mentioned that there's a number of hospitals that may not grant admitting privileges to a doctor whose sole practice is performing abortions.
Well, they don't admit. Hospitals are under no obligation to grant admitting privileges to anyone.
But your point
certainly
was,
they look at the procedures that
and
are
your point was
performed,
that some of them will not.
and it needs to be the procedures that they perform in their facility.
Sure. And your point was that some of them will turn that down because they don't want abortions performed in their facility. But you understand.
No, I can tell you, according to the Texas Hospital Association, no hospital in our state currently provides elective abortions.
Which is my point. You understand that we're not asking them to be admitted. The bill doesn't ask for them to be admitted for the purpose of performing abortions. It asks for them to be admitted for the purpose of being able to treat their patient. I mean, doesn't it make sense that if something goes wrong at that clinic,
is a procedure that they don't offer in that hospital? It's a catch-22, Phil.
It's not admitting privileges for an abortion. The bill seeks admitting privileges for them to be able to treat their patient in an emergency. I mean, don't you want that doctor, if there's a hemorrhage or something else, to be able to jump in the ambulance, go to that emergency room, and immediately begin to treat that patient rather than have to call over and say, hey, something just went wrong, I don't have privileges at your hospital, but there's someone on the way there and try to get another doctor up to speed.
Well,
that's the purpose of the admitting privileges.
I know you have kids.
To treat the
I know you have
patient for the
kids.
injury,
I have kids. All of us that are moms in here know and parents, I guess in general, know that when you're going to have a baby and you go to a doctor, that doctor may have admitting privileges at a facility that you're going to deliver at, but the doctor may not be on call. The doctor may be out of town. Different people take over. You don't always have the physician that you're counting on to do something. That's just not the way it works.
The point is that do you not want the doctor that was present when the emergency arose, do you not want them to continue to be able to treat that person at the neighboring hospital? Again,
it's not necessary to do it that way, Phil. That's just not how it works.
Well, certainly it's how it works.
No, it's
That's
not.
the purpose of having the amendment, the admitting privilege, so that if you're a patient...
Do you know what a hospitalist is?
I'm sorry?
Do you know what a hospitalist is?
Yes.
So do you know that the trend right now is to go toward having more hospitalists?
I know that.
Where your
many people
physician does
select
not
their
go into
physician
the hospital.
on the basis that they will be able to treat them at a specific facility.
I'm trying to explain something to you here. That normally what's happening now is you have the hospitalist who treats you when you're in the hospital. It's not even the physician that's been taking care of you outside of the hospital. There are all kinds of ways that medicine is delivered. I'm sure this gentleman could tell you that as well.
But do you not, again, the flaw in your amendment, would you not agree, is that it creates a gap period from the 91st day until the clinics have to be upgraded to ambulatory surgical centers?
You know, I don't agree with the bill itself about changing it to an ambulatory surgical center for administering medications in particular. I think that's really ridiculous. But if indeed, because I am offering this suggestion,
Representative King and Representative Howard, if I might remind you both, we appreciate the discussion, the very spirited discussion, but would you please allow each other the courtesy of finishing their statement before you speak.
Well, that depends on whether she goes first. Go ahead.
Ms. Howard.
Ma'am? I don't have anything to say. I move to not table.
Good.
Representative Howard sends up an amendment. Representative Laubenberg moves to table. The question occurs on the motion to table. Vote aye, vote nay. The clerk will ring the bell. So Representative Laubenberg voting aye. Representative Howard voting nay. So Representative Turner voting nay. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? There being 86 ayes, 55 nays, the motion to table prevails. Following amendment, clerk will read the amendment.